You ready for this?
Oh, I am. You give me a number that might be the highest number I've ever seen on the energy equation.
That's cool. Having that constant battle of like working out what's best for you as a person, but also you as a professional. It takes a while to master. There's recovery protocols you need to go through. There's been a strict correlation between my kind of uptick in performance and mental preparation. It's something I take very seriously. That has been the most insightful bits of data that I've been given in a long time, and I think that's amazing.
Ben Earl, welcome to the energy equation optimized by Pure Sport.
Thanks for having me. Pleased to be here. Pleased to talk about all things life and recovery, and happy to crack on.
I'm excited because you are, for those who don't know you, which cannot be any human, you are current England Rugby Union number 8, Saracens number 8, professional rugby player. You are, in the words of many people who know more about rugby than I, England's most consistent top player.
Well, it's taken a while to get into that conversation around that. It's taken a lot of hard work, and it's a lot of hard work to come. But I'm really enjoying where I'm at in my career right now, for sure. So
good, and you're bringing a great volume of joy to people like myself who love watching the rugby.
Yeah, well, try to. I mean, it's sometimes tricky with the results, but we try and focus on performance as much as we can. And we talk about bringing joy to England fans and rugby fans. And at the end of the day, we're in an entertainment industry, aren't we? So we've got to entertain.
So good. And I think people who've seen you play would recognise a sheer volume of intensity that you bring to the game. And you are, from a rugby perspective, a high energy individual. I think the purpose of today is to explore that energy and look at you as not just the rugby player, but the man, and think about how you manage that level of performance, but also how you manage your energy outside of that performance. Mm-hmm. So when we start this pod, we normally ask people how they would frame their energy, thinking back, certainly over the last couple of months, with 100, again, not just in performance, but general life being optimized energy. I feel, everything I could wish for in terms of cognitive clarity and emotional energy, as well as physically not being knackered. And then 0 is that just absence of any energy, any capacity. Where would you put yourself as a singular number between those points?
On a consistent basis, I'd probably go 65, 70. Mostly because there's a number of different factors. Training's pretty hard.
Yeah.
Emotionally, it's pretty brutal getting up week on week in terms of you're battling physically, you've got carrying a lot of knocks, a lot of niggles, and then you've got, stuff like results. And then, throw on top of that, trying to keep your family life happy, trying to maintain your studying, stay in touch with friends around London. I mean, there's a lot thrown into that. So about 65, I think is about right.
I think that's a great insight because again, we can see the athlete combusting, and people probably don't see the effort, the hamster wheels, the swan's feet under the water that's required to get there. And we're going to explore a little bit of that today. But, for you to deliver that performance comes at a cost.
Yeah, it does. I think there's two sides of it. There's like the social costs. Yeah. There's like the, I think like pre-season is always a pretty apt example. You get home at 2:30, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and you've been flogged from 8 a.m. And it's, balmy outside. You want to get outside, have an ice cream, have a pint of beer, and you go straight to bed for like 3 hours, which I think is just like completely perverse in like anyone else's mind. And that's exactly what we need. And then I think there's obviously the kind of emotional cost of that as well, is like, you have to be selfish. You have to say no to things. Your partner wants to go out on a Sunday walk and you've played the day before and you just physically can't because there's things you need to do. There's recovery protocols you need to go through. There's mentally recharging. Yeah. And I guess it's kind of a balancing act, and that as much, having that constant battle of like working out what's best for you as a person, but also you as a professional. I think that's a balancing act that it takes a while to master.
Yeah, and you're definably 8 years into your professional career. Is it more that managing the emotional side that's developed as a muscle, or is it the physical recovery, or is it both?
For me, it's been both. I think if I look back to myself when I was a 21, 22-year-old, I'd be able to play a game, I'd be able to go out that night, result dependent, then, being sociable on Sunday, and then come Monday morning be absolutely sweet. I think as you play more games and you play at a higher standard and a more consistent standard, you work out that that's not sustainable. That's not the right thing to do. There's a time and a place for that, of course, but for me now, it's more about play on a Saturday. It's how quickly can I get back to even being 70, 80, 90% come Monday afternoon, Tuesday morning, because Monday morning is a horrible time anyway. You feel like you've still been hit by a bus, but come Monday afternoon, you've trained a little bit, you've got back on the wheel, as it were, and you get back to kind of even par, as it were. So it's a constant juggling act. You talk about those people with the plates on the end of a stick. That's very much the case from the moment the final whistle goes to kind of getting back going again.
Amazing. And I want to dive into some of the things you've built in terms of your strategies that have enabled you to be at the top for these 8 years, and we would all be hoping for a number of years beyond. We had you wearing a monitor. I think you love data. I love data. I sense you're a master of the craft of all this stuff. So again, putting a monitor on you is comes a personal risk to me that the data's got to be good. It's got to be interesting.
Well, I hope it was worth it. It was great. The amount of times I took my shirt off and people think I had some sort of heartbeat regulator or something going on. I had to tell them that I'm coming on this pod. But no, I'm intrigued to know. I've been wearing a Whoop for 5 years now, and I almost wonder what I'd do without it. And I guess there's a reliance on something else telling you how you feel, but I do really rely on the data, the numbers, HRV, heart rate, rest and sleep quality, that kind of stuff.
So interesting. And that's what we're capturing. So we've taken another heart rate variability device. It's got a different algorithm, a different measurement technology, but it's doing a similar thing. Yeah. And we're going to get a score for over the 3 days you've worn this, and it's just the 3 days you've worn it. We'll get an overall score that I'm going to try and match against your 65 at the Mo. And then we'll get a separate score for how you're dealing with stress and recovery, which is much more interesting in the recovery lilt from our perspective. We'll get a score on sleep and its restorative effect, and we'll get a score on physical activity. How dare we gauge the physical activity of the current
Well, you picked a good day, because Sunday I was off. I wore it Sunday. Then Monday we had a light session, but I had a bike in the middle, so you probably see that. And then Tuesday we had a hard training day, but again it was a little bit lighter because of the load that we've had recently. So it'd be interesting to know what that kind of comes out with.
Brilliant. Well, I'll start with the overall score. Okay. So you gave yourself 65. The monitor gave you, tiny drum roll, just showing you there, 77.
Okay, cool.
Really good. And actually would be potentially significantly higher were it not for the fact these were relatively light load days. And that load is a word that's so often used in sports performance, but it's that amalgam of all your physical activity. Yeah. And can also be that sort of psychophysiological load that, travel or trauma, that all goes into the same pot. Your body doesn't really know what the difference is between a physical training session and an argument with your partner. We'd see people start matches with their heart rate close to maximum. Yeah. And the body's getting ready for what it anticipates. Of that, let's break down why we've scored 77 and probably start. I think recovery is our most interesting area, because it feels like you're a bit of a student of recovery, potentially student turned master, because you've applied a lot of stuff there that I think is really robust. So your stress and recovery score is 83 out of 100.
Okay.
And what that's really looking at is over the course of each 24 hours, how often your body was physiologically restoring energy. And this particular device, again, breaks you down into periods of green on the monitor, as we see it in front of you, are reflecting where a nervous system called your parasympathetic nervous system is the dominant part of your physiology. So we are recouping energy. Yeah. And if we think of you like a battery, we've got the ability to expend and the ability to recharge. So here we've got these periods of energy restoration as green. We've got periods of outlay as red. And we're just looking at you like a battery over those 3 days and saying, look, across a period of time, did Ben restore as much energy as he expended? And the answer to that would be with abundance. Your volume of recovery is super impressive. And what's so impressive about your recovery is that it doesn't all come from sleep. And I'm going to talk about sleep in a minute. Yeah. Your sleep is a bit of a rock star. I want to come back to it in a moment, because you give me a number that might be the highest number I've ever seen on the energy equation.
That's cool.
Really cool. But we've got loads of this sort of green during the course of the day. which is a really strong sign that your body's not constantly at war and then it switches off during the night. From a going into that recovery mode, that energy restoration mode, what are some of the habits and behaviors that you've brought into your lifestyle deliberately?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably the only thing that I'm very OCD at. I honestly, there are bits of my day that I won't be able to like almost look at myself and say I've given myself the best chance to perform at the weekend if I don't do.
Yeah.
So I have an ice bath at home. So I'm a
Amazing.
big ice bather. I tend to try and do it in the evenings, but if I feel really beaten up, I'll do morning and night before training.
And is that because lots of people do ice baths for different reasons. Some do it for sort of cognitive, grit development. Yeah. Others do it for musculoskeletal reduction, inflammation. Some people do it for sleep. What's the big benefit you feel from it?
I'd say more musculoskeletal. Mentally, I could do without sitting in the pain of 3 degrees. I've got it at 3 degrees at the moment, which
is very aggressive.
Bonkers. I just feel amazing having get out of it. Like before every game I play, I always have one. I have one. I tend to have it 5 hours before I start playing.
Wow!
And it gives me the best chance, I think, of flushing that last bit of stuff that you don't want out of your legs. That last bit of whether that's DOMS or just mental soreness or inflammation. Because that's really what it's like in the season now. It's like trying to regulate inflammation, minimize, so that you're in the best position to play. So that's one thing I certainly do. I give myself 24 hours rest period after a game, but then I'll always sauna 3 times in that week.
Wow.
Never 24 hours before the game.
Yeah.
Massive sauna fan.
And is that a traditional sauna? Or
that's a traditional sauna.
Okay. How long would you do in there?
I would I like to flit in between ice and sauna. So I'd maybe do 15 minutes in the sauna, 4 in the ice, 15, 4, then end it there. So that's, I'm trying to do math now, 38 minutes of recovery taken care of in a short space, which I think's amazing.
And do you feel, because of course, if you measure, if you've got your Whoop or a heart rate device on, you'll see that elevate during the sauna.
Yes.
But it's a very restorative form of low level stress.
Yeah, and it is. I think there's, I'm not going to quite study, but I think there's stuff around your cardiovascular capabilities around saunas and just general, for me, mental well-being. It's a really nice time for me to just completely switch off, and I'm not watching a screen because you can't.
Yes.
I'm sitting there with my own thoughts. It actually gives me like a bit of time to think about my to-do list for the week. I always find that's quite helpful. So that's another staple of mine.
Love that.
And then the other 2 bits, I guess, are I try and use a cryo chamber once a week.
Okay.
Usually on my day off.
Is there one at the club?
There's not one at the club, but I use a clinic in Kensington called the Body Lab.
Yep.
Would definitely recommend anyone who would like to use. That's probably the best I've seen. And that also has a hyperbaric. The hyperbaric as a rugby player is quite important for kind of brain recovery. There's strict science between hyperbaric and recovery from subconcussions and normal concussions, as it were. So that's another big thing that I try and get in once every couple of weeks. Spend an hour in there. So those are probably the 4 staple physical things that I do. And again, it's all about combining mental, physical, emotional well-being, but again, inflammation being the main target of that.
I love that, and there'll be a lot of people who don't know what hyperbaric is. So it's you're breathing 100% oxygen in a highly pressurized chamber.
Yeah,
and it's a lot of data leaning towards brain injury recovery.
Yes,
and were you guided to that through club protocols, or is that on your own research?
Again, it's something that I've been lucky enough to play with people that do no recovery and play amazingly. I've been lucky enough to people that have got to a point where they won't be able to play if they haven't stretched or done a certain thing for 2-3 hours before a game. Yeah. So I've kind of fruit picked bits that I think I'd be able to do, because at the end of the day, like, you could do 24 hours of recovery, like, if you wanted to. Like, there's loads of different forms, but for me, I found something that works. I found a bit of a routine, and those are the 4 things that I really feel like. 1, I've got data to back it up that it works. I've got my own kind of feeling, placebo effect, as it were, that I feel like I'm getting better. Yeah. And then lastly, like, I can do it. Like, I think that's half the battle, isn't it? Like, we'd all love to have a cryo chamber in our garden, but that's not possible. But I'm lucky enough to have access to something that works. So yeah, those are the 4 things that I find I can access as much as anything.
Love it. So that's that physical recovery piece.
Yeah.
From the emotional recovery, where does that tie in?
So I've got 2 big routine things. I have someone that I speak to. I have a performance coach that I speak to who is completely not involved in rugby in any way, shape or form, works with a number of different sports and business people that talk a lot about feeling, talk a lot about consistency, talk a lot about mental preparation.
Yes.
Again, it's something that I didn't tap into, and there's been a strict correlation between my kind of uptick in performance and mental preparation. It's something I take very seriously. And the other bit is I journal. I diary most days around how I feel, what I've done in the day, what I've done outside of rugby, and what I've also done recovery-wise. So, those 2 things are big, like cornerstones for me, being able to park what's happened before and be able to attack what's next.
I cannot tell you how much I love that. In terms of what value both those tools have. We know for most, whatever profession someone's in, the ability to share those thoughts, rationalize them, challenge them, and that journaling as a free expression of that feeling, is a really robust technique. Is that commonplace in the changing room, or I wouldn't have thought
I couldn't speak on behalf of everyone. I know people that use performance coaches. I know people that just journal. I know people that do neither. I don't think it would be the norm.
No.
There is provision there if you want it, but I think, again, I don't want to speak on people's behalf, but do you think there's a macho kind of thing? Yeah. Journaling is seen maybe, I don't know, something a bit not necessarily falling in line with a rugby player's routine, but it's something that I've found works. I tend to be quite a harsh critic on myself in terms of if the team lose, I'm thinking about what I've done poorly rather than what I've done well. So it allows me to put both sides of that down. It allows me to put context behind certain things. So, for example, like if I've had a poor game and I know that I've got a lot going on off the pitch, or I'm a bit ill, I can write that down, and all of a sudden I'm like, that's completely normal. I can feel better about maybe coming up short in a performance that I really wanted to perform well in. So, yeah, it's just allowed me to be a little bit more kinder to myself as much as anything, I guess.
That's an absolutely brilliant takeaway. And within recovery, we often look at nutrition and within that, obviously, particularly supplements.
Yeah.
I follow you online and you're a big believer in supplements, as am I. What does a normal day of supplements look like?
You ready for this?
Oh, I am.
So in the morning, it's fish oils, vitamin D, magnesium, cordyceps, lion's mane, collagen, protein drink, and a flat white. Just to top things off.
The flat white is absolutely...
that is, by the way, probably the most crucial thing. I love making coffee. It's a big thing for me, like a therapeutic. And then in the evening, I'm doing chondroitin, collagen, ashwagandha, ultra magnesium, unwind, CBD oil, and that, I think, is it. And I always wear blue light glasses 2 hours before I go to bed.
Oh, interesting. Well, I'm going to get onto that on sleep, because I tell you, whoever sells those glasses is probably going to sell a few more when I show you your sleep.
Big fan. I'm a big fan.
That's really interesting. And a mix there of sort of, of anti-inflammatory.
Yeah.
You've got some interesting pieces in there. Is the lion's mane specifically around, again, that brain injury and the neurogenesis piece?
Yeah, and like dropping in pure sport with this, they're one of the only ones I've seen that make it. And I took it for a while, and the big thing is it doesn't stop concussion. It reduces the effects, like long-term effects of concussion, as well as reducing the depth of impacts of these sub-concussions, which we might pick 3 or 4 up in a game. Yeah. So I've been able to take that for a number of years, and actually I know people that have really suffered. Joe Marler, Danny Kerr, people that have played multiple times for England, they now take it, and they think their mental health and their brain health is improved 2-3-fold.
That's so interesting. And again, this sort of preventative toolkit, Ben, that you've got, you're doing the hyperbarics. Sleep is our biggest opportunity to protect our brain, and we'll come to that. We've got lion's mane in there. Again, various different forms of protein. Magnesium playing a key role in that unwinding.
Yeah. I think, again, one that's probably been added to, that's probably the last thing that came in and probably made the biggest difference. That and unwind in terms of sleep.
Yep.
we as rugby players, we're quite simple beasts. We rely on, for want of a better word, heavy medication to try and sometimes sleep after games.
Yep.
You're talking about diazepam, tramadols before they were banned. These things which, almost zombify you. This gives me a way better chance of sleeping and also not having a reliance on something that is inherently unhealthy. So
good. And that unwind is a sort of a blend of elements that help, again, the nootropics and elements that move you into sleep. That is superb. What a combo. So, in amongst all this, you're recovering amazingly. You encounter a volume of load that most of us can't imagine. And that's all those things you talked about, not just the training volume, the pressures, the variables outside of your control. The fact that you've got some of these incredibly robust recovery modalities, plus these emotional outlets, plus a fairly, again, phenomenal supplement program is great. I'm loving listening to this. This is gold for me. But I've got to move beyond that and talk also about the other areas. It sort of feeds neatly into sleep, because clearly lots of this you've just mentioned there is sleep. Let's go to your sleep score, so sleep out of 100, you've scored 94.
Okay.
Which I think might be the highest sleep score we've had. Why it's particularly relevant, your sleep, is when we measure sleep, we use this parameter, heart rate variability, which in itself doesn't mean much. It's a confusing parameter because you can't compare mine with yours.
Yeah.
Thank God.
Yeah, I've certainly found that in terms of, we have like a community in the rugby world where a lot of us wear this.
Yeah.
People's heart rate variability can be like 70, 80. And I found that I think mine's closer to, there you go, you probably got the figure somewhere.
I've got here, you hit 146.
Yeah, so like mine tends to be around that as a rule. So, and again, there's not one right way of doing it. That's just how I am.
Yeah, and you generally, the idea is higher is better. What it's really trying to work out is how much it varies. So all technologies would say, what is your normal variability of your heart? And then when there's less variability, then we're inferring that's becoming physiological stress. When there's more variability, we're inferring that's physiological calm. So the idea that one number defines whether you're calm or stressed is not true, sadly. But there's undoubtedly high fitness individuals and individuals with good, again, recovery management tend to have higher values, but 146 is monstrous. Monstrous.
Okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah, beautiful. And really what's beautiful with your sleep is sort of everything, in the fact that, when we look at this day, you can see that your body starts moving into physiological recovery 3.5 hours before it goes to sleep.
Yeah.
And are those sort of evening rituals, is that fairly established with assuming it's not a game day and you've had a late match?
Yeah. So very much so. So we're talking about what I do before bed. I don't eat late. I eat very early. I try to eat around 6:30.
Okay.
Try and stay away from red meat. I love steak. It's a real issue. And the only time I have red meat is the night before a game. It's a pre-ritual of mine. I always have spaghetti bolognese.
Oh, that's amazing.
That's my only time. But I think I love steak. I love fish. I've loved like the process of cooking. So it's all about trying to unwind from that. So 6:30 I'll eat. Gives myself the best time to, like you say, digest that. I'm blue light blocking glasses from about 2 hours before bed. And I tend to try to get into bed for about 9:30.
Okay.
Having done all, other bits and bobs. So I get into bed 9:30, try and read for half an hour, having taken those supplements. And honestly, by 15 minutes into reading, I'm struggling to keep my eyes open. That's a good sign that I'm pretty much ready for bed.
Entirely. And what we see with your sleep is it's undisturbed. So often we find people who are sort of, their sleep isn't a constant block of green. When we look at yours, it's a constant block of the highest volume of parasympathetic engagement imaginable. That is deep and rich recovery, which to a certain extent you can only get there if you've asked your body a demand during the day.
Yeah.
So we through physical activity, we build something called sleep pressure, and your pressure is helping you go into, again, we haven't got sleep cycles here, but that is unequivocally deep restorative sleep. And that's a big change, obviously, since you brought in some of these supplements. Definitely. Anything else so the blue light glasses is interesting. With blue light glasses, clearly the logic there is the light from devices, TVs,
Yeah.
suppresses melatonin, and that could inhibit your ability to fall asleep and go into deep
Mm-hmm.
sleep. When you've got the blue light glasses on, would you still continue to check social media? Would you do you change your behavior?
I'll still watch TV. I try to turn my phone off. Yeah, and like I said, but the moment I start reading, I've set my alarm. I've turned my phone on silent.
Yeah.
I'm in bed.
That's the big one.
I'm for all intents and purposes asleep in everyone else's eyes, so
Yeah.
won't be contactable. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what it is as well. The blue light blocking glasses I've got, it makes me feel real drowsy. Like it like kind of tints all the light, and
Yeah.
it's lovely. So yeah, it's a big thing for me.
So and you notice that almost straight away from putting them on.
Yeah.
I think some people pop them on and then trying to continue to watch a sort of Netflix horror film.
Yeah, if you do that, then you are going to struggle. But yeah, like I said, I'm not a big like series watcher. I tend to watch whatever's on. I'm sports mad, so yeah, try and watch something like that.
So good. And so when it was those periods when you couldn't get to sleep, and were being was that post game? Was that what was that being too wired? What's
yeah,
changed?
so I think the big, I guess the only time now I can't really sleep that well is after games, regardless of what time the game's at. I really struggle because there's a number of things I don't eat on a game day, so I tend to rely heavily on caffeine. And
interesting. Don't eat at all.
No.
So what? Even at like 3 o'clock.
If a 3 o'clock game, I won't. The last thing I'll eat in is the night before.
Is the spag bowl?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's just a thing I've done. It seems to work for me. I never feel like I suffer energy wise. It's just I can never risk feeling bloated going into a game. I've been there before and it's horrible.
Yeah.
There's not a worse place in the world. So
what do the nutritionists say to that?
oh, it's a disaster for them. They hate it. They hate it. But it's the only thing I really put my foot down on. Like this medicinally, it's probably wrong, and nutritionally, it's wrong in every sense of the word. But I just put my foot down on that. So it's Haribo's and caffeine for me all day, which is pretty taxing. So by the time I get into bed, I'm like potentially wired from the adrenaline, but also like suffering a little bit from this mental caffeine come down sort of. And I've also felt like I've been hit by a bus. So it's kind of a number of different things. And then the mental, emotional side, like I really struggle with like falling asleep and not reliving every moment of the game.
Yeah.
And I don't watch the game until the day after because emotionally I can't detach from the result until that. So yeah, it's a big struggle of mine, and it's something that I will probably suffer with until I stop playing. But as long as I can quickly get back into a routine the morning after, I feel like I'm okay with suffering one night a week.
I love it, and that sense of if your performance is your performance. So that's a very difficult thing for any nutritionist or other allied professional to challenge because the output is what matters. What would be your caffeine timing before? Is there a? Because obviously the side effects of caffeine can also be.
So it's if it's a 3 o'clock kickoff, I'm up at about 8:30. I do allow myself an hour of no caffeine before I have one on a game day, because correct me if I'm wrong, the science is if you give yourself an hour without the caffeine, then your body does think that it's got to wake up without relying on something else.
Yeah, so there was a study that showed it blunted the cortisol awakening response,
that's
which
right.
has, for most people would be relatively innocuous at your level of
Well, I need
1%.
I need everything I can get at that point. So
totally logical.
So I'm a caffeine an hour, flat white an hour after I've woken up. I then sip on these carb drinks, which is like they've got a lot of carbs in that you might get from food. Now, not ideal, but it's a carb drink nevertheless.
Okay.
Which is fine.
Do you know the grams of carbs you take in that period of time?
Too much. It's almost like a thick, gloopy fluid by that point. Probably too much. So I'm on that all day, and then I'm having a Red Bull when everyone else is having their pre-match meal, which is about 3.5 hours before game.
Wow.
A Red Bull just after the warm-up.
Yep.
And all the while I'm chewing on Haribo's. It's disgusting. And then at halftime I'm having another Red Bull with an energy carb gel. So I'm 2 flat whites deep and 3 Red Bulls by the time I finish the game, which is
incredible.
Awful, and but it's something that works.
Well, enormously works, and again, the performance is the out. So the thing is, you can retrofit this. This can become your model. Suddenly,
it's fine. I'll trademark it.
Yeah, exactly. The Haribo,
the Haribo Red Bull
axis. But I think does that volume of caffeine not create a sort of a performance anxiety? Does it not ripple into that?
Definitely. But I think anyone who's played elite sport, the worst moment is the bit just before you go out, just before you go into your arena, whatever that may be, whether that's the rugby pitch, the basketball court, whatever. It's the worst moment because you're about to put yourself in somewhere where you shouldn't physically go.
Yes.
Emotionally, you shouldn't go there. And you have all this, if I'm honest, I feel a lot of fear before that moment because I don't know, you're stepping into an unknown, no game's ever the same.
Yeah.
It's different to going to the office and sitting at a laptop and doing your work. It's different to that. So the anxiety is already pretty high. So I think I can't make it any worse. And I guess I would almost be more anxious if I didn't have that to fall back on, which is crazy, but it's something that I do.
It's worked.
I
think that's
hopefully
amazing,
it continues
man.
to work. Yeah,
so good. And again, on that night, clearly, the half-life of caffeine will still be in your system.
Yeah.
Plus the game adrenaline, plus those ruminating thoughts. But 1 9 out of 7.
Yeah, exactly.
And again, based on the fact, this isn't a well-being program. This is a performance program, and on that particular day specifically.
Yeah.
And what we've got here is that ability to say that your baseline is so strong that you get the opportunity to stretch that elastic band, if you like.
Yeah, I try to. And I guess it's, if I've got things I can fall back on, so if I know that I'm going to put all this time, energy, resources into trying to recover in the week, I allow myself the hell that I put myself through on the Saturday so that I can crack on with everything else in the week.
Absolutely brilliant. I'll never watch a game the same.
No,
again.
well.
I'm going to be glued in. Well, I'm always glued. And so we should probably look at physical activity. It's a brave man to discuss physical activity with you because you are pretty, impressive as an athlete. But we measured you from the 3 days we captured. And it's quite interesting that these were quite low days. And actually your score for physical activity was 53 out of 100.
Okay.
And,
so that makes sense.
Yeah, which is great. And again, this device doesn't know what you do on the other 4 days of the week and so forth. And that's reflective of that you've dropped your intensity levels down.
Yeah.
It's mostly low intensity work, which is great. If I look at physical activity, you spend very little time. 9 minutes at top end on that particular day. This one was I think you got up to 174 beats per minute on that day.
Yeah, that's so that's with on our high intensity training days. We tend to start the session with some conditioning to get yourself into a fatigue state so that you can carry out your work under duress, as it were.
Gotcha. And what would that look like practically?
That's running shuttles, bag hits, contact skills, all under short, sharp efforts, but to a point where you feel a real spike in your heart rate. You start getting a bit like, this is crazy. Like, how am I conditioning my thoughts? And then you're straight into the rugby detail, which is a big thing for us in terms of being one of the clearest thinking teams under pressure.
Yes.
Making the right decisions, whether that's kick, pass, run, discipline stuff, all that. So that kind of makes sense. And like I said, that's even for the thing that's on the Tuesday, that was a pretty light session. So we've got a big game on Saturday. So they tend to do a lot of work earlier in the blocks. They call them blocks in terms of stretches of games.
Yeah.
So that when you get to these big games, you don't tend to do too much, so that you're never carrying that into Thursday, Friday, and God forbid Saturday.
Spot on. As in, you don't need to be fitter. You need to be as fit.
Yeah.
But that's so interesting that lots of people wouldn't, when you look at your sort of junior or amateur sports, they would do the strength and conditioning at the end.
Yeah.
You do the skills-based work where you're fresh, and then you do the S&C to beast people at the end.
Yeah.
That you deliberately, again, in this arena, exhaust yourselves before you then do the skills, so you can replicate that performance on the pitch.
And I mean, that's one. And then on the first day of the training week, the club and country are very keen on getting a watt bike under your belt, which is probably the quickest way to emotionally and physically get rid of anything you've got from the week before. We do some pretty crazy efforts. We had, from Monday, from memory, we had 8 1 kilometer efforts with a 45-second rest, which is
ouch.
Yeah, and like I'm not built to be a watt biker. Where some of these second rows, bigger guys, heavier. I haven't really got the height or the weight, as it were. So it's real graft, and it's not necessarily about the scores. It's about putting yourself in a place where you're showing that you're doing the work, because you can't be constantly running. It's not fair on your body, but watt bike's pretty low impact and high effect. So yeah, big thing for us.
Brutal. And that sort of would almost be classed as anaerobic work.
Yeah.
So there's 1 minute bursts, so using a different energy system. I reference that because as part of this, I've captured the objective measurement of aerobic fitness, which is VO2 Max. And we spoke off camera that it's quite rarely taken in rugby.
Yeah, not taken much at all. In fact, I've in my 8 years, I've never had it done. I guess repeatability is a big thing we talk about in rugby in terms of the game's 80 minutes long. Certain positions might be doing a sprint a minute.
Yeah.
Of what is max exertion. So it's almost that, like, however you can do that as many times is more important than what you're putting into your lungs. Now, there are bits around pre-season that we work on, breath work, etc. But yeah, not something that I'm fully aware of.
So interesting. And that piece again is, it's not a great performance indicator for this sport. So VO2 Max has risen into, and why it's relevant for the energy equation is people's aerobic capacity, their air endurance has a big relevance to how they manage stress, has a big relevance to their day-to-day energy levels, has seemingly the biggest impact on longevity. So it's risen up in that regard. Who doesn't have high VO2 maxes are people with huge volumes of body tissue, because it's how much oxygen you can consume per kilogram per minute.
Yeah.
So am I allowed to say your weight?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so you're probably in the public domain, all the stats. So you're 106 kilograms.
Yeah.
So you don't see many 106 kilogram Tour de France cyclists.
No, I don't think so. I'm keen to have a go though.
Or marathon runners or triathlon, because you can't be a great endurance athlete and carry that much tissue. So I've done a VO2 max, and when we get to sort of elite levels, we're looking at measurements of 50 and above, which is 50 milliliters per kilogram. And you were 51.7.
Okay.
Now there'll be others who aren't professional sports people who might score higher, but not at 106 kilograms. So, if we took your engine, your heart's capacity, your lungs capacity, your cellular capacity, and we put that in someone who's, 60 kilograms, then they would have, a world record VO2 max, up in the
awesome.
90s. So you've got a huge engine that at the moment is delivering oxygen to a large number of tissues. It's a point of interest because, as you say, you train in that repeated intermittent sprint format, which replicates the game that you play, which is why it's not taken as a sort of mandatory piece of sports performance.
Yeah.
But from a health and wellbeing point of view, Ben, it's a rock star result.
Brilliant. That's nice. Like I say, first time I've had that result. I guess the other piece around a rugby player is, whereas VO2 max is probably, correct me if I'm wrong, probably got by sprint efforts, whether it's physically running or on a bike. We do a lot of work around how quickly, efficiently can we get off the floor, having tackled someone, having rucked, having mauled. How quickly can we get off the floor, get round the corner? How quickly can we get off the floor, chase a kick?
Yeah.
These are big things that we work on in terms of down-up efforts, shuttle efforts, all that kind of stuff.
Love it. And that specificity is the key principle to all sport. So it's a great result. It's a collection of great results is what it is. And I think, we started this with the idea you're at 65 and people might go, hang on a minute, I see this guy and he's 110 out of 100 and his performance levels are such. I think you've given a great insight into the fact that doesn't happen by chance and that comes at a cost.
Yeah.
But also you are paying an awful lot of effort to the mechanisms that keep you in that performance sphere. I think your insights into your recovery is gold and amazing. You've done lots of that off your own bat. Your emotional recovery is supremely impressive and for me a great ambassador for the fact that these things do align with people who we determine as macho and significantly masculine. Journaling for me is a very robust, brilliant technique. We've got an incredible supplement stack. That alone is.
You might have to put it on some sort of file or a PDF. And get it going.
Definitely, it's my greatest supplement stack. It's the greatest sleep we've ever seen, and and what we're seeing here is you're not where you are by chance, Ben. You're here by a large amount of design. And from my perspective, it's been an absolute joy to be able to go through this set of data with you, and thanks enormously for coming on and sharing. Is there anything out of this that you will take, or is it all just consolidate?
I guess firstly, Thanks very much for having me. It's been that has been the most insightful bits of data that I've been given in a long time, and I think that's amazing. I would just say recovery is what you make of it. Like, don't let a sauna or an ice bath convince you that you should feel better. If you don't feel great, that's fine. Find something that works for you. I think your body is your temple. It's on you to find a way that works. But also, there's probably proof that doing nothing is sometimes the best thing you can do. It's lying on the sofa and watching TV or being out with mates is sometimes as important. And I would just be a big advocate that mental recovery is probably as big as physical recovery. I think that's the big thing I'd take away from this, but also the work I've done previously. When I mentally feel better, physically my ankle's not as sore, my knee's not as sore, my shoulder feels a lot better. So yeah, that's a big thing for me.
That's a great summary. Ben Earl, thanks for coming on the Energy Equation.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.